Hello everyone, this is Iwatu Atsushi. Today I will be doing an abrupt live feed. The exact thing I was worried about came to pass. I have already argued the issue in my serialized articles in Fuji Evening News. Today, I would like to briefly tell you about the problem. According to one article in Sankei Shimbun, it says Kadokawa, a publishing house, decided to suspend the publication of one book which talks about gender issues, because it may hurt feelings of the person involved. The news has received a lot of questions on SNS. Let me read the article briefly. Kadokawa announced to discontinue the publication of a book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, in a Japanized version, which was originally scheduled to be come out on January 24, 2024. Though the publisher was going to bring out the book, it lastly gave up on the idea of publication. That is the summary of the article. Then, the question is why the publisher made such a decision. Immediately after the announcement of the publication, the book brought on active debates over its pros and cons, regardless of that it originally intended to deepen the debate in Japan through introducing gender-related matters in Western countries. To put it shortly, by mentioning the discussions so far in Western countries, it aimed at cultivating a better understanding about transgender in Japan. However, the publisher apologized on the grounds that there are some derogatory depictions in the catchphrase and title for the person involved. It is pointed out the title, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, might offend them, and the catchphrase, I don't know exactly though, also may cause controversy. This work was originally published in the US and already translated in 10 countries. Abigail Shrier, a writer for the Wall Street Journal, wrote the book, and it is based on interviews with 200 people and 50 families on the theme of gender. This work was originally published in the US and already translated in 10 countries. Abigail Shrier, a writer for the Wall Street Journal, wrote the book, and it is based on interviews with 200 people and 50 families on the theme of gender. I think she researched thoroughly. The introductory part says that gender-affirming care is spreading among girls in the UK, and the number has increased by 4,400% in the last 10 years. It's not that a rate of increase is not 440% for 10 years. It says that 40% of university students in the US identify themselves as LGBTQ. They were jarring facts. In conjunction with the cancellation announcement, the translation team at Kadokawa informed on X, formerly Twitter, that it would delete a series of posts about the book and likes on comments received as necessary. In response to the discontinuation, some of the comments on SNS said, "This book should save someone." The cancellation goes to the extreme. This book is essential for Japan to strive for diversity. Freedom of speech will undoubtedly be under threat if this phenomenon becomes commonplace. There are many voices like this on SNS. Let's see how the company reacted. Apology and notice from the Department of Academic Nonfiction. We announced the cancellation of a book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, in a Japanized version. Immediately after the announcement of the publication, we received various opinions on the contents of the book and the pros and cons of publishing it. The publication of this book was planned in the hope that it would provide an opportunity for domestic readers to deepen their discussions through events in Europe and the USA related to gender. We are sincerely sorry that the content of the title and catchphrase have resulted in harming the person concerned. We take your comments seriously, and the editorial team will continue to build on its knowledge on this subject. We apologize again for this. So to speak, they apologize for publishing it. It means that what they tried to publish was a mistake. This is what could be described as total surrender for the publisher. If so, it would have been a good idea not to publish in the first place. But the translation resulted in bumpy criticism. In short, flinching led to the decision to stop publishing. I consider that to be a big problem. There are two main issues here. One is the issue of freedom of speech. Whatever the opinion, freedom of expression dictates that books whose publication is a clear defamation or intended to incite discrimination should not be published. But is this really the case in this instance? Basically, the book has been published in the US and translated in 10 countries, so there is room for debate, even if the contents are shocking. Therefore, it would be inappropriate to unilaterally label the discourse as discriminatory. I haven't read this book yet, so I bought the English version on Amazon. After reading it, I would like to share its contents with you. I would like to focus on whether the content is so peculiar or discriminatory. This is the first point. This is about freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is guaranteed by the Constitution of Japan, and it is questionable why the aforementioned infringements are permitted. The first point is that this is inappropriate. Regarding the second point, there is not a deep discussion on transgender in Japan, and it is a dangerous sign that discussing transgender is in itself a problem. I would like to reiterate that. This is not to say that the existence of transgender is in itself a problem. Indeed, some transgender people are suffering, and it is only natural to take such people into account. Self-identifying as transgender or being able to perform sex reassignment surgery lightly is another matter. It is not reasonable to lump them all together and point to them as inappropriate. These are two issues that should be considered, in my opinion. Regarding the first, freedom of expression, this is guaranteed in the Constitution of Japan. The question of the extent to which freedom of expression is recognized is very difficult. While there is an argument that in principle all freedom of expression should be granted, there is also an argument that too much freedom of expression is not good. The country that allows the greatest freedom of expression is, to the best of my knowledge, the United States. After all, freedom of expression is supposed to be granted to the fullest extent there. On the other hand, for example, there is an opinion in Europe that, despite freedom of expression, things like hate speech should be regulated. This raises the question of the extent to which freedom of expression is permitted. I take the view that freedom of expression should be handled with common sense. A French magazine called Charlie Hebdo once caused an incident when it published a satirical picture of the Muslim prophet Muhammad, which led to a tragic incident. My feeling at the time was that, although freedom of expression should be secured, it is going too far to make that much fun of something that many people deeply respect. Indeed, on the one hand, some argue that freedom of expression, whether religious or otherwise, is included in freedom of expression. Nevertheless, I think it is better to have restraint when it comes to freedom of expression. In that sense, I'm not a freedom of expression fundamentalist. Jesus Christ, Muhammad, the Emperor of Japan, insulting such symbols should be disregarded. Therefore, for example, when it comes to Aichi Triennale, the expression that the Emperor Showa's portrait was burnt to ashes and trampled, even though it might be freedom of expression, is unforgivable to the Japanese people. Then, I appealed that such things should be unacceptable even though it is freedom of expression. At the time, the Asahi Shimbun and other mass media said it was freedom of expression and should be recognized. However, their insistence on not recognizing hate speech is a double standard. The question then becomes what exactly their criteria are. If the argument is that freedom of expression should be recognized to the fullest extent, then when it is pointed out that hate speech is a category of freedom of expression, it is a double standard to say that hate speech should not be recognized but insults to the Showa emperor are. I have previously pointed out that that is not how we see it. When I think about issues of freedom of expression, I always think about what are the main principles of liberalism. Not only in our country but also in the USA, people who call themselves liberals have become extremely intolerant and illiberal. However, liberalism has its origins in tolerance. Where modern liberalism originates is in the need to be tolerant with regard to freedom of expression towards others, as emphasized in the Treatise of Tolerance written by the French Enlightenment thinker Voltaire. Similarly, in Anglo-American terms, it is J.S. Mill's freedom theory that seems to think the most about freedom of expression. These two books should be read to learn more about classical liberalism. There is a book that explains the nature in simple terms. I have a book that I thought was well written. Who wrote this book? What a book of mine it was! The title is Kokoku to Bakoku Prosperous and the Ruin of a County. In its chapter 4, it writes about the double standard in freedom of expression and sense of inner freedom. The chapter also explains the harm principle as written in J.S. Mill's theory of freedom. In On Liberty, he says that principle is that the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number, is self-protection. It is not good for someone to be harmed for certain speech, saying for example, get rid of the right wing. It is not good to allow people to beat right-wingers walking down the street or to hit them with a baseball bat. If such a thing were justified, I would not be able to walk on the roadside because I would get an earful. Arguments like this that would harm anyone, not only on the right but also on the left, such as the argument that it is okay to hit leftists, cannot be indulged. It is stated that maximum freedom should still be respected as long as it does not cause harm. The reason is that ideas that were considered unusual and uncommon at one time may later be considered correct. Examples of this are the heliocentric and geocentric theories. If you advocate the geocentric theory when the heliocentric theory is considered as the prevailing idea, you will be branded as a strange person. There are arguments that are different from the world in general. There are those who advocate something different from what was common knowledge at the time. Leaving aside the pros and cons of that common sense, there are many arguments that it is not the mainstream of its time. Even if there is such a debate, it may later become clear that the majority of people's ideas are wrong. Do you believe in fortune telling by blood type? What is your blood type? What blood type do you think I am? Sometimes people say certain person are type A because they are meticulous, or type B because they are sloppy, or type AB because they are strange. Some people like to read blood types, though I don't believe in blood typing. Various people say that type B is suspicious, or that type A is nervous, but these things can later turn out to be totally wrong. It may be that blood groups themselves have no basis in the first place. Some people like to categorize personalities by blood types. Some people do not fit into the framework of assumptions, as some AB types are meticulous, for example. What is considered right in the world in general is not always right. It is even possible to be wrong afterwards after all. Referring to the geocentric and heliocentric theories I mentioned earlier, the heliocentric theory was initially the dominant idea, But it was later argued that the geocentric theory was more correct. The ideas that were considered common sense at the time were not always correct. Similar cases can be found elsewhere. For example, there was a preposterous argument in some studies in Germany, for example, that whites were superior and blacks were inferior, based on the idea that the size of brains differed according to race. This is an idea that is linked to eugenics. No one believes in such ideas nowadays, but it was considered common sense or science at the time. It is possible to be wrong later on. It is okay to have an idea that disagrees with what is considered to be common sense. Rather, dissenting ideas can correct errors in science and various other things, and gradually advance, evolve or deepen them. Simply put, the history of science is built on the accumulation of errors. It is also possible that the majority of people were wrong, or that the idea is meant to encourage people to reconsider by challenging what has been considered to be common sense, so objections are acceptable. However, it is J.S. Mill's view that arguments such as violently eradicating someone through arguments that would harm them are unacceptable. I believe that this freedom of expression based on the Mill's harm principle should be respected as much as possible. However, while I basically agree with this view, I think we should still consider the extent to which freedom of expression should be allowed. A careful debate on freedom of expression is required, as it also gives rise to arguments such as whether it is acceptable to hurt people mentally. I am extremely doubtful as to whether it is really right, from the standpoint of freedom of expression, to put a stop to the publication of this book. It would be okay to have an argument against the publisher. Transgenderism is not scientifically understood at this time. However, the current global trend is that the discussion of transgender is now almost a matter of keeping one's mouth shut. I think this situation is dangerous. This means that a situation is fostered in which objections are not tolerated. For example, I wrote in the Fuji Evening Bulletin, "Do you all know the term TERF? TERF stands for Trans-Exclusionary Radical Feminism. This in essence involves the discourse that biological men and women are different, which in itself is discriminatory. To reiterate, there's now an argument that biologically the bodies of men and women are different and divided into sexes, but that in itself is discriminatory. People who argue against such ideas are criticized for being racist. You may have read or watched Harry Potter. Its author, a woman named J.K. Rowling, whose views lean towards feminism, stated the following in one newspaper article. When the expression "people with periods" was mentioned, Rowling said that they could be described by another word, women. She said if you have menstruation, you must be a woman, not a man. It may seem like an obvious statement, but her assertion was met with tremendous condemnation. She was branded racist for her claims, which sparked a lot of backlashes. This led to her being regarded as a TERF. Daniel Radcliffe, who plays the lead role in Harry Potter, has expressed opposition to her claims. When she argued that there was no need to go to the trouble of saying someone is menstruating, and that it would be better to simply say a woman, which drew a lot of criticism. Radcliffe insists that biological men who self-identify as women be recognized as women, not the other way around. It is not an assertion that they are men because they are biologically male. What he is arguing is that if someone self-identifies as a transgender woman, she should be recognized as a woman. Any claim to the contrary, he says, erases the identity and dignity of transgender people. He also says such claims are contrary to advice from professional organizations. Adding to them, he argues that not treating transgender women as women erases their identity and dignity. They mean that biological sex differences are not recognized. From the point of view of freedom of speech, I accept that there are such views, but it would be strange if this is the only view and no dissent is allowed. Some are biological men, some are women. And yet, it is understandable if there are transgender people who feel uncomfortable there. However, it is hard to understand that the term biological male or female is itself discriminatory. There is now an expression in English, though cumbersome, about biological males, such as women with penises. Many will question whether it is a woman. In contrast, the mind that wonders if she is a woman is criticized as discriminatory. Because I am tolerant about freedom of expression, I accept that there is such an argument. However, if it is asked whether the opposite view, that men and women are biologically different, is itself discriminatory, I would disagree. Rather, we believe that suppressing such discussions is contrary to freedom of expression. It feels like it is taboo to mention transgender people. I am against allowing such a trend to prevail in Japan. Therefore, it is not right to pressure people not to publish these books, or to say that critical discourse about transgender people is discriminatory. There really needs to be a discussion about whether it is right for little children to have sex reassignment surgery. In fact, I have read about such tragedies in some of the books I have read. I would like to present a case study from Belgium. There was a woman who said she was born biologically female. Her siblings were all boys and her parent loved boys, so she decided to have a sex change, claiming that she was really a man. However, despite her sex change, she was not happy at all and eventually ended up being euthanized. People around her encouraged her to change her sex, but she changed her sex and ended up committing suicide. In the end, she was tragically forced to commit suicide. As for the argument that it is problematic to give children such a choice, I don't think it is discriminatory. Rather, it has to be actively discussed. If a book is criticized after publication for being discriminatory in its content, that is one thing, but to stop publication before the book is published is an act of deprivation of freedom of expression, which is the mainstay of liberalism and should be severely criticized. So the publisher must not give in to such actions. If it is going to stop publishing, it shouldn't have done it in the first place. I will read the book to see what it is about. I may find that some parts of the book are not right. It is normal for any book to have pros and cons, as things are generally never 100%. However, I think it is going too far to say that publishing a book is wrong. I would like to ask why the Asahi Shimbun, which claims to defend freedom of expression, or other advocates of liberalism in Japan, have decided to remain silent on this matter. Someone calls me right-wing. I'm being told I'm right-wing, and I'm arguing that we should protect freedom of expression. I would like to ask which is more liberal. You won't know anything without first reading the content. There's a ridiculous liberalism that allows the publication of books that suit them, but bans the publication of all other books. My book Kokoku to Bakoku explains the irrational theory of freedom. I hope you will enjoy reading this. There is a section in this book that explains the reasoning of a Frankfurt School figure called Marcuse. The suppression of the decadent is a necessary condition for the strengthening of the progressive, he states. In short, he says it is important to suppress bullshit theories in order to make progress in this world. Such claims are messed up. In essence, they are arguing that the right wing should be unfettered and we on the left should be allowed to speak. He is trying to explain it in a difficult and convoluted way, but he is claiming bullshit. In its essence, it is simply an argument that the right wing should be deprived of its freedoms and give more and more freedom to the left wing. Can such absurdity be allowed? However, Japan is moving in that direction now, isn't it? So to speak, there is no freedom of speech. There is no real freedom. That would be unacceptable. The Asahi Shimbun and those who call themselves liberals have decided to remain silent, saying that it is wrong to criticize the burning and trampling of the Showa emperor's portrait. And then companies like Kadokawa give in to the voices of opposition to their publication and stop publishing. This is not a desirable sign for the Japanese speech space, but rather a dangerous one. After actually reading it, I will tell you each of the good and bad parts of the content. The act of banning publication before reading is outrageous at any price. These dangerous ideas are a reality in Japan. As I mentioned earlier, in the UK, one woman was criticized for being a racist just for saying that there are women in the biological sense. I have to say that this is crazy. I can understand the logic that there are biological men and women and that some people suffer from the gender difference. I never said anything about discriminating against transgender people. Rather, I think we need to think about those who suffer from such gender differences. But what do you do when you have a scammer who claims to be transgender when he or she is not actually transgender? This is another discussion that needs to be considered. In Japan, if we look at the LGBT Understanding Promotion Act promoted by the Liberal Democratic Party LDP, which is considered a conservative party, the bill includes the term gender identity in its legislation. Gender identity, in essence, means that one's gender identity is determined by oneself. In other words, the argument is that there are gender differences in the mind that have nothing to do with biological sex. LGB say they are male or female and have different romantic interests. Transgender people say their own gender identity is different and is a completely different issue as an argument than LGB. The two are being discussed in a mixing-up manner. While there may be some who truly suffer from transgenderism, the majority may be claiming it out of spite. Or they may have a mental illness. At this point, the situation is that we do not know what is right. We have to wait for scientific progress to determine correctness. Who will be responsible for those who are unhappy by promoting sex reassignment surgery under unknown circumstances? The publication of this book should not be denied as a source of information that can be used as a reference for discussion of the issues involved, such as what happens when a person undergoes sex change at an early age. Denying the publication of such books is an act of suppression of free speech, which I believe should not be allowed. What do you all think about this? I would like to think that such behavior is wrong. I have not read the book yet, but will read it as soon as I can and take up this issue again. Then today I sent out my first newsletter. The topic is about Muramatsu Go, who is conservative intellectuals of the Showa era. The first reading is free of charge and we would be happy if you could read it. If you are interested, please sign up for my newsletter. We hope you will click on the link in the overview section. We hope you will visit us at Fumiai. This is a full-fledged newsletter. I would like to reiterate that we hope you will take a look. In conclusion, I will tell you that transgenderism is not a problem in and of itself, but the way it is discussed. We will continue to pursue this issue. Thank you very much for watching my video.